Hello, everyone, and welcome to our today's panel, Combating Control Failures, How Can Enterprises Stop Preventable Breaches? I'm your host, Andreas Wuchner, and today we are going to be discussing the findings of the 2023 iteration of Panaseer's Security Leaders Report and exploring what lessons security teams can take from its insights, including how preventable breaches can be stopped in their tracks. I'm today joined by Dr. Rebecca Wynn and Don Glavach, and I'm pretty happy that you both are here and would like you both to introduce yourself quickly. Let's start with Rebecca.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure being here with everybody here. I'm Dr. Rebecca Wynn. I'm a cybersecurity strategist, global CISO. I sit on many boards and also a keynote speaker. And I have a podcast, The Soulful CISO, where I interview people such as Teresa Payton, the first White House CIO, Dr. Ann Kavukian, who is the mother, the queen of privacy by design, and many other people on the show. Dom, how about you?
Thanks, Rebecca. And thanks for having me as well. I'm Dom Glavach, and I'm the Chief Security Officer with CyberSN, a cybersecurity technology and staffing firm, where I provide subject matter expertise to our clients on cyber strategy, organizational approach, as well as offensive and defensive tactics.
Very, very impressive. Thanks you both to join me today. Let me get it started, right? I think you both know, and everyone on this call must really have seen that Panaseer just launched a Security Leaders Peer Report earlier, and 800 companies from the UK and from the US responded. And one thing which came out of it that 9 out of 10 leaders see failures of controls which they expected to be in place, but they didn't, right? As a root cause for failure. And that's pretty annoying and amazing at the same time. And the survey also found that 79% of enterprises have experienced cyber incident that should have not taken place because they thought the controls were in place. There are plenty of reasons, right? Control drift, whatever the reason were, but they thought and also reported to the board, hey, we have everything under control. And then reality hit and it didn't work out, right? So let's start with you, Rebecca. How is this, do you see this as well? Do you have clients which are saying the same things? How do you see this situation?
No, it actually doesn't surprise me. A lot of times people think that, hey, it's something new. But since we really came out with having computer technology, it's been the same issues over and over again. I think one of the things, it's where compliance meets security. When you look to see if you're compliant with a control, it doesn't mean that you're 100% risk covered. All companies run on some form of risk. 2, when you go into testing control, it's at 1 second point in time, but the next second, you might not be compliant with the control. So if you end up having people out there who get a report and they assume that every single one of the controls that might have been tested and being 100% compliant 5 seconds ago or 10 minutes ago, thinking it will be the next 10 minutes, not necessarily true. Things go very quickly. We see that very much so when we have AI and we have AI tools trying to outsmart other AI tools. When we have bots out there that are able to be spun up very quickly. It's the whole attack surface out there that keeps expanding very quickly. So it doesn't surprise me. Everybody, whether you're a startup to a Fortune 100 company, we're all doing the best we possibly can, but we're never going to be 100% risk averse in every control, incompliant every nanosecond of the day. Dom, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I really think it speaks to the notion of resilience. And the Panaseer report was pretty revealing to me on this number, because when I first saw it, I said, well, 79%, that feels high. And then you just think about it a little bit. The complexity of environments, the number of tools, the size of a team, the amount of data that is, quite frankly, sometimes we just don't know where. And take a very common control like phishing. Everyone has business email compromise protection in some fashion, and it's some set of roles. An email goes through possibly a heuristic. It rolls through maybe AI or a sandbox, and yet still the fraudulent email from the Geek Squad still gets through. And I stepped back and said, okay, why does that happen? What's the root cause? The speed of business, the change in technology, exemptions, maintenance. And I really came to the conclusion that the number's not that high. I think it's the state of the industry. It's why we prepare for resiliency. And it also gave me a little bit of pause and said, this is still a people on people challenge. Adversaries versus protectors, researchers. And although I don't agree that the number feels great, I think it's spot on. It's very revealing and pointing us in why resiliency is so important.
I totally agree. I think, that this DORA regulation just came into effect in Europe, right? And it's all about resiliency. And now they ask exactly for that, saying, hey guys, you need to be prepared, you need to get better. And because obviously, at one side, we want to support the business and move on and make things great and all that stuff. At the same time, we have requirements, safety requirements, but also compliance requirements. So the balance between helping organizations, especially as you said, Rebecca, in agile environments, it is a really, really a difficult balance act to keep that right by saying, look, I have the things under control, but at the same time, I'm not hindering the business to be Dr. No and say, oh, you can't do that. You want to be helpful, right? At the same time, reality is just, there is shadow IT, there is a lot of pressure and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think Rebecca also touched on this point in time notion. You're really spot on. When you implement a control and you validate it and do some periodic testing, that's very a moment in time when things are, I think, optimized. It's where we want it to be. All the conditions are exactly perfect for success. And I don't know that there's a lot of time built into handle unexpected failures. So your point in time comment really resonated well with me.
And I think what adds on to that is we have so many devices that are connected, and then you don't even know what is not connected. And you don't know, especially when people have SaaS and stuff like that, and they can go in and get a login almost to anything. Knowing what your blast radius is truly going to be and what assets are totally going to be effective, I think that's a challenge for every one of those companies. And just another point, when you talk about the phishing, one of the things too is phishing keeps getting smarter and smarter and smarter. Sure. It used to be like it took like 7 data points, whatever, to reach back to you. And now pretty much in 3 data points, very quickly, they know, okay, this is who you are. This is your address. This is what you do. This is what the company believes in. This is who you touch with. So even the emails that before used to be seen very easily as fraudulent, they're getting tougher and tougher on systems to be able to pick them up. So you really have to be able to rely on humans, and humans can do things very quickly in a nanosecond. And what I mean by that is if you just went ahead and you had some database or something like that you connected to, and then you're having issues, and that phishing email comes through and just happens to be talking about the database that's public out there, people know you use Oracle or whatever, and it just hits you at the right time, you might click that button or do something accidentally fraudulently. Again, there's defense in depth that we try and protect ourselves. But the one thing I tell people, don't get your ego and your arrogance thinking that cannot also happen to you. So that's one thing is just really, you have to keep reminding the humans. And then it's a matter of when. So it's a matter of when it's going to come through, not if. And so looking at, do we have systems backed up? Can we very quickly disassociate that system from the rest of the network? Do we know where our inventory is? Do we know where ports, protocol, and services that touches to, so we can control that blast radius? I think that's one thing that was not addressed in the report. I think the reports are excellent. I think they've done 3 now. All of them are just great information for CISOs. But I was just telling them for next year, I'd like to go ahead and see how many people have a really good idea what their blast radius is. And what's the trajectory on that? How do you feel about that?
So I agree 1,000% with the blast radius, and it's something that needs to have focus. You also mentioned just connected devices, everything's connected. Along with that, attack, impact, blast radius. I'm asking other CISOs and other security leaders to consider their data radius when they insert another device in part of their risk profile. We still need to focus on the basics of the device security, the architecture security, the hygiene, and continue to focus on the data that comes along with it. So for every connected device has some data shadow. And how is that data being protected? How is it being encrypted in transit? How is it being encrypted in rest? Ultimately, who has access to it and when and how? So data has become a large part of that blast radius. And we don't overlook it completely. I think there's a large focus on the architecture, the authentication, data in general, not the residual data that comes with adding more complexities with the business and even with security tools. There's a data radius and a blast radius with the tools that we use every day.
Before I go into the frustration of many security organizations, let me just mention two things. I don't know if you guys have seen already last night, the World Economic Forum issued the new cyber risk report. And they talk a lot about that as well. So also in dependency of third-party vendor risk. They also mentioned in the side note that the awareness training, the old style is not working anymore. You need cultural change and all that stuff. So all what you just said is spot on right.
Sure.
One thing which spot on right, at least they see it the same way, right? So it's a kind of validation that we're not talking complete nonsense. One of the things what the report also showed that more than 2/3 of all security people are really frustrated by the fact that things which they thought they have under control were the reasons why things went wrong, right? And do you guys, as experienced practitioners, have any advice for CISOs, for our listeners, what they can do really proactively to prevent such things, to really, indicators when things go wrong or when drift happens and all that stuff? Any tangible stuff you can give our listeners to say, look, that's helped me in the past?
I think what has helped me and what I've advised both large and small is first build a strategy that has adaptability and look forward more than the 1, 3, 5. And what I mean by look forward, not necessarily in time, align with the businesses, align with the departments, align with your software, agile frequency. And when you're flexible and can adapt, some of this drift and exemption and maintenance, things that are maybe the root cause of these unexpected failures, you can start to understand when and almost predict failures through testing and red teaming. I think it's important when you build strategy, whether you're large or small, to have a bit of adversarial thought behind your approach. That point in time notion that Rebecca started with is really the core of testing the defenses, testing the offensive, having a proactive approach and enough time and at least resources or in-house people to perform red team testing of the defenses, as well as full-scale vulnerability assessments, pen testing, and really having an understanding of your visibility capability and what your gaps can be.
Yeah, I think one of the things when you look at companies that are startups to maybe the 500 million range, because generally those are companies that have been in fruition maybe for 20 years. I think one of the things I find consistently when I go in and consult with companies and do assessments is, what is your enterprise risk management policy? What is your tolerance level? What does that look like? Who is signing off on the one thing I see is the people who are signing on the risk, maybe they have a chief marketing officer signing off on risk or chief product officer on risk. And I tell people, I'm like, they don't even understand the risk. They're not the ones who should be able to go ahead and sign off on that. So I think it really starts there. And when we talk about strategy, a lot of times I see that people want to really get immediately to, if there's a dike and the water's coming through real quickly, what Band-Aid do I need to put on there? Well, when we talk about strategy, we're talking about several different strategies. What is your overall vision and mission, and how are you going to drive the business? Then what you want to look at is you want to look at what is going to be my operational strategy for cybersecurity, privacy, compliance. What is going to be the technology strategy and how we're going to be handling that. So that's one thing I do think too, is that we compass that all together. But those on the call, there are three very different strategies and roadmaps. When you talk about vulnerability management, things along those lines, we have great dashboards that can go ahead and give us a picture. But one thing I also go ahead and I look at comparing that to what are the assets in the organization. There's gaps consistently. So look at, do we have Linux? Do we have VMs? Do we have Windows? Whatever flavor you have, is every one of them really patched? If you're globally, look at them and also break down globally. Maybe you have a global area that has a bigger challenge in keeping them patched at the right cadence. There are things when you look at patching, your policies and procedures around that. Would you have compliance controls, for example, SOC 2, different things like that, requirements compared to your contractual requirements in the contract? Are you meeting them? Most people cannot patch immediately, right? They have to test them and things like that. And so you are always going to have that gap risk, but you need to be looking at maintaining that. And that's one thing I think it's that holistic, that you're always going to be exposed. And I want to mention one other thing on that, and I'll kick it back over to you, Andreas or Dom, on this. Your cyber liability insurance, it's requiring you as well to be able to prove these things, which I think helps us as CISOs. You can leverage that as another reason. They can negate your liability insurance when that event happens and getting any other support because you didn't keep things patched. What is your cyber liability insurance? Says that their patch cadence? Could you ever make that? A lot of people don't read those minutiae and those policies. So that's one thing I tell people, you leverage that for good, but always there is going to be a period of time it's at risk, and you really have to have a strong enterprise risk management, which is not just a policy, that's a committee of executives and people who actually tell you as a CISO how to go ahead and flag them very quickly if you get out of that risk tolerance range.
Out of curiosity, right? Before I go now and later on and move into the people side and our employee side and all that stuff, you're both experts, and Rebecca, you just mentioned cyber insurance. Is it worth it still, or is there a future for cyber insurance, or is there a point soon where the prices go through, or the premiums go through the roof? And as you said, the people don't understand really anymore all the little details. Just in short, does cyber insurance have a future for you both?
I'll come in real quick and then let John come over top, because I've just done 3 reviews very quickly on that for a couple different companies. The one thing, people out there, if you haven't done cyber liability reviews before, the one key thing to get through it very quickly is you're going to be dealing with a broker. The broker doesn't know our terms the way we speak. When you go ahead and you're dealing with the company itself, there's always going to be writers like you do on your home and different things like that. And then, so those are subcontracts, just like property and casualty is. So what I do is I go ahead and look at their questionnaire, but I ask to go ahead and speak to the security engineer or the compliance people from those companies, so I can make sure I can line up as quickly as possible. That's what gets you through it. The thing is when you look at what is coverage and how they're going to cover it, being able to discuss those items. When they look at your pen testing you, I don't really mean by testing. What they do is they actually have outside firms that look at your outside firewalls at all points in time, just like anybody out there who can use a scraper. What is the cadence? I go ahead and I try to ask them, who are you using? Company X, Y, or Z. They'll tell you that company. So then I can go ahead and I can easily contract with the company, and I can make sure that I'm on that same page. And so I know what's coming down the pipeline. But use them as a partner. And then the other thing is get clarification. The one thing I see consistently too is there's a note section on there. And you could say the reason we have to do X, Y, and Z is because if we did it A, B, and C, our business can't run. So we have to do it, QRS. You can define that in there. And then when you do have that nefarious event and you have to go ahead and try to get things paid for, they'll look at those. So look at those note sections to go ahead and be able to explain more what your environment really is, how it really runs, because everybody's environment runs differently. And that will save you from those exceptions. When you talk about cost, actually, I just went through several of them and I'm like, guys, you can really up your limits. There's bands on those limits. So go ahead and ask them about those bands. All those bands have gotten cheaper in certain areas. Mm-hmm. Part of the reason why they've gotten cheaper is because now if you look at the exclusions, they've gotten longer.
Yes. And the thing that I recommend is treating, much like you said, Rebecca, treating your provider as a partner and speaking to someone on the inside. I would augment with what you said with, I tend to recommend at least a semi-annual review and making any addendums in flight. So if there's been any changes from that initial notes, and what you said about using the notes section, it can't be said enough. Do more than just answer and check the box yes and no. Provide the addendums, add notes, add anything that can be explaining your benefit as to the why and what the exemptions are, and continuously touch base with them at least more than once a year, because doing it once a year is that point in time that Rebecca started with.
Yeah.
So.
I'm totally agreeing with you, because Panaseer sees that a lot too, right? That companies are asking for and having a real-time view of their real situation. So I'm totally with you. Just answering boxes or ticking boxes is not good enough, and it will get you in trouble sooner or later. Let me move a little towards our cybersecurity experts, right? Whatever number is correct, but we all know there's a huge demand in cybersecurity expert. If the number is 2, 3, or 4 million open positions, there are plenty of them which are open, and we all need more. In the last 2 years, I found we saw a major shift that if you look in applications and CVs of CISOs, in the past, no one had incidents or things in it. Right now, it's already an attribute. I survived the cybersecurity incident, right? And so that's good, right? Because it's just reality, as you both mentioned before. It's not a question if, it's only a question when. That's all cool. But people still, and wall of shame, I made a mistake. And so people resign for things which are, something went wrong and all that stuff. Is there anything we can do really? Also you mentioned about cultural change a little, to bring the cybersecurity organizations more to a point that the people accept that these things happens and that we constantly learn from it. Is there any, I know there's no silver bullet, but is there anything you can recommend to our listeners? And let's start with Dom. That's good practice, that works, that supports that change, that people are not afraid of making mistakes and use it and learn from it and all that stuff?
So you're talking retention of your team. Excuse me. The fear of making a mistake in cyber is sometimes paralyzing because of the impact. Again, having resiliency in not just your tooling and your protection, but resiliency in teams. So when an error is found or a mistake is made, it's able to be recovered from. And that's really a culture decision. Having a strong culture that fosters learning through failure it doesn't sound like a very happy way to learn. And it is really the reality. You think about the just the attack chain. Defenders and researchers need to get it right all the time. Attackers just have to get it right one time. So it's an industry prone to failures, whether they're expected or unexpected. Having a strong culture that fosters continuous learning, enabling people to have time to do personal research, personal development, providing training. Those are all pillars of what I call as a career path. Cyber people, when I told my CEO that I was doing this talk, her and her team talk to over 1,000 cyber professionals in probably a month. And they always share why they are leaving their company or why they're looking for another position. Although the report talks about tooling and data and reporting, it really comes down to this. Cyber people don't quit companies, they quit leadership. They're going to go and do relatively the same craft at another company for a different leader. So having career paths are pretty significant. I know there's aspects of salary and aspects of work-life balance. Rebecca and I could probably spend the large portion of this talking about cyber burnout and how to prevent it. I think the key to retention, my recommendation when I'm helping build organizations, is spend significant amount of time on their career path and their success in learning and moving to the next level, understanding what their role and functional projects are today, and stick to it. I know there's going to be drift because small companies don't have dedicated red teamers, dedicated SIM architects. There'll be drift, but when we define what their roles and responsibilities are, let's stick to it. There's a lot of frustration in the industry of someone takes a position or starts a position that was solely focused on the CI/CD pipeline, DevSecOps. And when they start, they're spending time answering and helping respond to IAM security tickets. There's a lot of craft and a lot of passion that cyber professionals possess, and they want to exercise that every day. Having a career path and defined responsibilities, I think, minimize the turnover and increase retention. What do you think, Rebecca?
Well, I think when we just talk about retention, there's a couple things that are going on. One, a lot of us aren't getting younger. Unfortunately, at times we're getting older. And so the people who have been in the trenches and know how to be in the trenches are retiring or getting towards the later part of their career where they want to do some other things. And then we have younger people who are coming out of college. And I think one of the things is the colleges that they're going to aren't setting them up for success. They're setting them up where normally they would not be in their career until maybe 7 years of actually been there and done that. Mm-hmm. And they're coming out with the expectation that all of a sudden they're going to be at that level when they don't have that experience yet. One of the things is it's not only about understanding the terms that are going on and the basics, but you kind of have to see it and been there several times to have those reiterations, the school of hard knocks. So part of it, I think, is more of us leaders being able to talk in those universities and get them on the realization about what a true trajectory looks like. And I think that's part of the thing when we talk about career path. I have people who want to go ahead and they want to be senior principal, security engineer. I just came out of college and you should be doing that. And like, you don't have the innate skill set yet. You haven't been able to practice them yet. So I think those realizations need to be set up. I think worrying about too much about career path and how I can go ahead and promote this person every 6 months. You have a title, but the bad guys really don't care about your title. They don't care about my title or anybody else's title. They're just going to come in. And if you do not have playbooks, for example, that you've been able to test over and over again, I'm not talking about reading it, but actually hands on the keyboard practicing that, like if you have a cyber warfare range that you can practice those, that's where you need to go. So I think one of the things is when we talk about career path, you need to remember it's not about how many months I've been able to survive in a company, but what skill sets have I been able to adopt and be able to put in play. I think the other thing when we talk about resiliency is a lot of CISOs out there, we are not protected from being able to be the information, scapegoat officers out there. And when you talk about resiliency, it's like if we have these younger teams, we have to go ahead and train them up because they're not getting those type of hands on the keyboard. And we know that our heads on the chopping block at our points in time. There's a big economy there. And I think that's the problem that's going right now. I tell people, I don't necessarily need another body. I need to be able to have time to train these great people I've already hired to be able to continue that journey, to be able to do their job really, really well. And since technology is going so quickly and we want to get products and features out so quickly, that's where the gap is. And that's where we have to use more smartly AI, machine learning, which means memory loss, those repetitive tasks. How can take some of those lower levels off the plate? So then I can go ahead and use these people as analysts and thinking through stuff, known, documented, implemented. Yes, but how are you measuring it and how are you managing it on a day-to-day basis? Those critical thinking skills, we need to be able to have more time with our teams to develop that and to develop in the future leaders. Not that I got out of college yesterday, so I want to be a CISO. I get that comment all the time. Or I want to be in cybersecurity because I watched an episode of Mr. Robot.
Also nice. The report supports what you both just said, right? Because the report showed that 70% of the people responded said, look, we spend half of the time on reporting, right? We get more scrutiny. We have more people asking, and we need to prove ourselves. People are not believing either that the data is correct, that things are accurate, and so on and so forth. And given that our complexity is constantly rising, and you just mentioned a couple of the typical buzzwords with cloud, with AI, and all that stuff, I think we have this dilemma really to on one side we want to support everything and we grow and all that stuff. At the same time, we want to do the basics right. And you both used the word basics before, right? Do you have any advice to our listeners how to reduce complexity again, how to get back to the kind of basic stuff which you referred to say, look here, to get also out to the tool suite or the tool stack is more simple and easy. The data we produce is trustworthy, and the reports, and I think, Rebecca, you started at the beginning with risk appetite and going down the whole tree, right? That we get to a point that it becomes easier again. I have the feeling, and I was running a governance and compliance organization, people are constantly moaning about, oh, another report, oh, that's not automated, we need to do this manual, oh, there is an Excel sheet somewhere, oh my God, all that stuff. Any advice from your side, out of experience, to say, look here, I did this and this, that helped me a lot?
I'll tell you that your framework can't be hope and pray that it'll be okay. And that's the framework. But I think one of the things is when most companies have gone some form of cloud, use some sort of SaaS, they assume that the other side's going to protect them. And I think that's what the danger is. You need to go ahead and look and see what is your responsibility. It's all shared responsibility model, and what the responsibility is from them. And then how are they going ahead and making sure that they keep their part of the bargain? I tell you what, people, the one thing that you can learn very quickly on how to do things better is to be able to look at those documents. How are they going about protecting you? And I'm talking about the big cloud providers, things like that. And you should be able to copy those same things. Access control is access control. Whether you went ahead and we did it when we had everything on premise, or you have things on the cloud. When I look at identity management, really, if you go ahead and you get a true handle on ports, protocol, services, who's touching what? Should they be touching the data? Should they have the data? Should you be keeping that data? Those things, hygiene is the same, but that's where I see that people gap. Think about any assessment you have is really you need to change your thought. Think of it as a war plan. If I was the enemy, how would I use what you're doing against you? If you're doing things patching every 90 days or whatever you're doing, access control every 90 days, I have 90 days to go ahead and not be detected. How can I keep minimizing that more and more and more? If you have 100 people getting into your GitHub depository, can you make it 99? Can you make it 98? Can you make it 87? Can you make it 10? We really need to look about that as everything that's going in environment. You need to look at it as its attack surface. And how can I constantly be monitoring that and making it smaller? And when you look at reports, I always assume I'm going to have to defend them in a court of law. And if you think about more from that perspective, I think it really does help you along those lines. When you talk about frameworks out there, NIST cybersecurity framework, I think is a great framework that be able to speak cross-business language. When we talk about AI several times in here, there are the AI risk model frameworks, not only from the EU, but also from NIST, United States. No matter where you are, you can go ahead and get those. We also talk about ransomware on this call when we go ahead and we talk about what is your protection plan, what is your playbook to go ahead and be able to get around that, how can you defend yourself, and cyber liability insurance like that to do things the right way. There's great stuff over in the EU, Australia. There's great stuff here in the United States, resources. Use those, but don't make a piece of paper, policy, or procedure never be implemented, never be followed. Then you're just doing the checkbox security or compliance, and that's not what we want.
You mentioned NIST. I think it definitely works well for a company that has a leaning forward in maturity. I often ask people to take a look at the CIS 18 as a starting point for the smaller firms. I think it's right-sized and can build a framework that's measurable for smaller organizations that have less resources, meaning less people, not necessarily less money. On the terms of complexity, I don't think we're going to simplify things per se. I think we can leverage automation. Rebecca talked about shared responsibility in the cloud, and it's significant. Understanding both sides of that responsibility really lets you understand how to build architectures. And when we talk about automation in cloud, everything that is built in the cloud from an architecture onto the documentation, we may build it once let's say by hand. After that, we should be using automation and leveraging automation to build software-defined networks, software-defined environments. There's a large laundry list of augmenting tools in both both in AWS and Azure. Just think about Terraform, building it once, testing it in a software environment, and then deploying it. It's a very complex environment. And when we break it down in software with accompanying documentation, it gives us the ability to take a step back and really do threat modeling against it from a tabletop exercise before we're doing hands-on penetration testing on that architecture. So I think simplifying things is always an option when you're building. And not every CISO has the opportunity to build it from the ground up. I mean, Rebecca, think about how many times you've worked with someone that has inherited a great deal of complexity. And there's no silver bullet, like Andreas said. In my recommendation or my prescription is understand the documentation and automate where possible, and automate all the time as your default theme.
Totally agree with both of you. I think very, very good insight.
Yeah. Let me just add one more thing before I go. When you're talking about complexity, we're moving into Rebecca said about how we protected it on-prem versus off-prem. A lot of those disciplines you can migrate from one to the other. When people are thinking about zero trust architectures or zero trust access, that can be a very complex environment and architecture as you build it. So my advice on ZTA, zero trust architectures, is include simplicity. You can overcomplicate that because of just the number of regions, the number of devices, the number of people, the context. That's where simplicity should be built in, because we have most people are building that today. And please consider simplicity in the entire access chain and context.
And let me just add on to that. I think one of the challenges is that companies aren't paying attention to the data as it's coming in and being able to tag their data and understand it. What does that have? PHI, does it have something like that? You need to be tagging your data. And one of the things we talk about complexities, because we talk about all these new regulations that are coming out there, because more and more people want to go ahead and say, I want to be able to have the right to be forgotten. My personally, Rebecca would like to be forgotten unless she tells you to remember her, like reverse. But one of the things I tell people, there's a difference between data loss and there's internal exposure that everybody's under NDA and stuff like that, and just go outside your environment. When we talk about data breaches and stuff like that, we're talking about data that flows out of the environment. Inside, you might have somebody who saw it and didn't have a need to know. Yes, you have to clean that up. But really paying attention to those outflows and inflows is what we're talking about when we're talking about zero trust. Zero trust is not new. It's been around since way before 1960s. But now we have more avenues that actually can go out. And if you don't believe me, a lot of people that are remote, if you're out there, how many people have Apple Watches that they're using connecting? Are you using phones and they have the phone connected to their personal Apple Watch? Do you end up having Siri or Alexa or Google Echo or something like that in their homes? Are they actually picking up your stuff, right? That's the things that we're talking about, is really paying attention, not only about just, your laptop that might connect somewhere, but what about their personal area network that is also connecting to your systems and your data flows that you're not paying attention to? Those are the type of things that are hard to get harness on, but we can leverage looking at event files and stuff like that a little better. I think the other challenge right now is because data lakes have gotten relatively cheaper. What people are doing is they're throwing every single thing into their data lake. Well, now when you go into the data lake, still garbage in is garbage out. And just being able to synthesize more and more and more logs without having what is really going to be our log management framework. What are we going to really be looking at? What events are really important? If you don't clean it up, that also ties back to what gives people fatigue. They end up just getting so many alerts that I've seen this happen a couple of times. Let me just go ahead and turn off the alerts. Or so I don't keep getting yelled at that I can't go close tickets, stuff like that. Then let's just zero them out and wait and see if it screams again. Bad guys play on that, or bad ladies, right? Anybody wearing a hoodie, joking about a hoodie. But that's what they go ahead and they do. And that's when we talk about, I'm always really fearful about the sleeper cell out there. Someone who got out there 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 9 months ago, and you've been just sitting, waiting for those employees to leave. So I have a new team in who doesn't know any of the tribal knowledge. And then you go ahead and kick them back up. That's the really freaky thing.
Before I ask you to wrap up, because we're running out of time, so one thing which I'm really amazed about this report is, you see that everyone wants to do the job right. That the CISOs out there, everyone in their capability has the ambition to do the things right. They try, but the CISO community in many areas in this world are still not good with sharing, right? Everyone on its own, oh, this is cool, this is nice, some more technology, some more risk-based. But can you give the people some kind of advice, which controls to monitor for, which areas, which are the indicators you really want to be, or they should be aware of, where they can get the information about best practice, someone has done it before, all that stuff, you both mentioned it already a little before. And also, is there any kind of tool or something like this where you say, look, that's cool. If you use that tool, that gives you already a little bit of an oversight. And I think, Dom, maybe start with you.
Yeah, for me, it's knowledge. I think tools are adaptable and fit in, a particular enclave in vertical or industry. It's all about knowledge for me. Gaining knowledge through conferences, attending great webinars like this one, and the ability to have continuous learning. Are your teams participating in capture the flag exercises? Are they doing not large scale research projects, but are they doing independent research and just really understanding how adversaries move? Are they doing their own personal threat intelligence in their particular passion? Do you have a cyber range that Rebecca mentioned where you can see things live? Do you have the opportunity to run Cobalt Strike in a safe environment to really see what a leading tool that starts a lot of large-scale data exfiltration looks like, feels like, the pains of installing it, the ease of information flow once an adversary has that in a network environment? Really seeing and experiencing before it's a failure, because seeing and experiencing it from an attacker's standpoint is such an advantage. Major sports teams, when they're in large championships events, they don't practice their offense. They practice the other team's offense so they can defend. And we should think like adversaries. Again, no silver bullet. I think red team and proactive, proactive approaches are really the key to understanding gaps, blind spots, and the holistic view of just where unexpected failure can occur.
I think one of the areas that companies fail to use is the vendors that you deal with for your SIMs or whatever, CASB and things along those lines. Get with them. One of the things that I try to make sure that's in contracts is that they help me instantiate well. Again, they're part of my augmented staff. They have security engineers, they have network engineers who see a lot more events from a lot many different companies than you do. They can help you go ahead and say, for example, if you're in an insurance business, what is happening maybe in the financial sector? And then I know generally in 6 months to 9 months, it's going to hit the insurance sector. If I go ahead and I look at what's happening in the financial sector, what is generally the time frame that it's going to hit healthcare if I'm working with healthcare companies? One of the things is they can actually help you to go ahead and do those benchmarks a little bit smarter. I think the other thing they can do too is they have great threat intelligence. And usually like always, like a lot of times people really don't even, we assume they know how to read the threat, but they don't know how to read the threat intelligence. So going ahead and making sure that they can get with great people, and it's like, this is what the threat intelligence feeds. How do you go ahead and determine if it's really a factor in your environment or not? The so what? Same when you look at the CVs on vulnerability management. How many, I would tell you that it's like every day I go into a company, when I go ahead and sit with them, I'm like, what are you patching? Why are you patching it? Is it a factor in your network? Is it not a factor in network? Consistently, people don't know how to think through that thinking process and how to go ahead and mark that correctly in their environment, so then your risk register is accurate. So reach out to leadership that's out there and your vendors. Reach out to the people like me and other great companies out there for being able to train your people how to think and see more intelligently from that standpoint. The other thing that I do as a CISO, sometimes companies don't like this, but I need to do it for myself anyway. If you go ahead and you see that there's a major breach out there, look through it, go ahead and write like the top 6 or 8 things on how they were hit, and do a checkbox. If this was us, would have nailed us the same way. Because when you have your breach, one of the things you're going to find out in a legal setting is you're going to say, didn't you learn by company X, Y, and Z who just got nailed that same way 6 months, 3 months, 2 years later? If you do that due diligent walkthrough yourself, your self-test, you can go ahead and say, yes, we were being very mindful. We went ahead and tested ourselves against those major breaches this way, and we were compliant. And then put that as part of your checks and balances. Again, it's a matter of when you get hit, not if. And being able to do the due diligence best ability. But that's the thing, is like that, is that helps you also as a CISO able to work with the board. But those internal things, I think, are really important to do that real-time walkthrough.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Just to close the loop, because we started at the beginning with the 79% of breaches which could have been prevented because the controls were there. And I think just as to close it, to each of you, and maybe start with Rebecca, ladies first, what is this one thing you would tell someone, look, to prevent these breaches from controls you thought you have under control? If you do this one thing, the likelihood that you suffer from the same problem becomes lower. Is there anything you can recommend?
Well, hope and pray it'll be okay. Never should be your motto. And we always work with humans. Our staff is humans. Our stakeholders are humans. Every button that's pushed is due to a human. So make sure that you enable people, that they understand what does not look right and how to report that safely in your system. So almost like an internal bug bounty. Don't beat up the reporters. That's one thing I see is people, unfortunately, can punish the people who are bringing things to your attention, but you really have to have that as a safe place for them to report things so you can get them resolved.
I think awareness is the key, Rebecca, and I would augment that with testing your defenses. It is still a people on people. Now we could almost say it's people versus people with AI and machine learning. So awareness is significant, and testing your defenses, whether it's red team or penetration testing, it's something that every company has resources to do. And it's just a matter of taking the time.
Very, very true. I think the controls you have in place, you just need to monitor, you need to know your assets, you need to do your changes, all that stuff. And I think you both really nailed it. And really with that, I want to thank you both for the time and for all the insights and the sharing of information. I think this was very, very nice, and I hope that our listeners find it as insightful as I found it, and I'm looking forward to the next one. And I think that's time for me now to bring this session to an end, and I want to ask everyone Just check out the attachment section where you can find the link to the download of the Panaseer 2023 Security Leaders Peer Report. And I also want to ask you, leave us feedback. You get a prompt at the end. So therefore, don't be shy. If you liked it, let us know. If you didn't like it, don't tell us. The usual thing, right? So thanks so much, Don. Thanks so much, Rebecca. And see you the next time. We hopefully do this same kind of thing again.
Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you.